Fear is a dangerous concept. It forces us to remain silent and keeps us from growing as individuals. We have learned throughout history that when fear causes our voices to remain silent, we the people are easily controlled by governments and individuals with power. When America became independent, the Bill of Rights was created to ensure that fear of government rule wouldn't turn into another oppressive government. Americans fear the government slowly taking their rights away. This causes a fear of an unjust judicial system. In 1950, this fear was again exploited by Joseph McCarthy. He manipulated America into believing communist government officials were slowly corrupting the government. The fear of McCarthyism caused the judicial system to ignore the Sixth Amendment, stating Americans should be given fair trials with reasonable evidence. This results in innocent Americans being jailed. Communists were singled out as a group and given unfair treatment, despite the fact that all Americans have the right to hold their beliefs. To be an American is to have freedom and opportunity. Our freedom is protected by our amendment rights, but once we decide to ignore them, our freedom is no longer guaranteed. This causes a shift in what it means to be an American. During the 1950s, there was a great fear of communism corrupting our government, and McCarthy took advantage of it. Joseph McCarthy was a Republican senator in Wisconsin from 1947 to 1957. McCarthy's popularity was relatively low until February 9, 1950, when he delivered a speech in Wheeling, West Virginia. He made accusations against many political figures, claiming they infiltrated the U.S. and committed espionage, therefore corrupting the American foreign policies on communism. Communism was a significant fear during this time, and now with accusations against the government, high-ranking officials were on edge and afraid of being called out. In the film Good Night and Good Luck, Ed Murrow begins with a program on an Air Force lieutenant who was discharged due to his father and sister allegedly subscribing to subversive papers on communism. Ed Murrow stated that all without a trial and without the unsealing of charges against him, Milo Radulovich wasn't even given the opportunity to have a case. The Sixth Amendment states we are given the right to fair trials. Radulovich was not shown that. As PBS states, McCarthyism, the paranoid hunt for infiltrators, was notoriously difficult on writers and entertainers, many of whom were labeled as communist sympathizers. They were unable to work, some had their passports taken away, while others were jailed for refusing to give the names of other communists. The trials, which were well publicized, could often destroy a career with a single unsubstantiated accusation during this time period. It did not matter what one's status was, McCarthy would accuse anyone who stood in his way. As judges and juries became frightened of him, those accused were often found guilty. A group named the Hollywood 10, who was famous for creating a short film against McCarthyism, were all tried in court for being communists in 1947. In the article, The Trial and the Blacklist of Hollywood 10, written by Jack Warner, he states, the Hollywood 10 were accused of being members of the Communist Party or being sympathetic to communism. These accusations were in line with the HUAC's Un-American Activities Policy, but none of the accusations were actually crimes. These men spent 1 year in prison to these accusations, even though there was no plausible evidence that they would be in jail. The First Amendment protects freedom of speech along with freedom of belief. Of communism itself, it was no crime, yet these men were imprisoned. Throughout the history of America, we've seen many court cases with biased verdicts and decisions made in our court that are not entirely based on our rights and evidence. There are many different factors that persuade the decisions. Media, status, race, and money are often kept in mind when juries and judges decide on their verdicts. Since McCarthyism, there have been many other examples of unjust verdicts due to biased opinions. Some famous ones include the trials of O.J. Simpson, Rodney King, and George Floyd's murder trial. Another controversial unjust court case was the murder of Breonna Taylor in 2020. She was shot and killed in her apartment by 4 officers conducting a no-knock search warrant. The officers raided her apartment and shot her on March 13, 2020. Later that same year, Louisiana officials agreed to pay the family of Breonna Taylor $12 million of her wrongful death. However, this was only after people started protesting. Many government officials only decide to repay the victims in order to keep their image clean. The 4 officers on the scene were only put in jail this past years after shooting Breonna Taylor 2 years ago. This can be tied to McCarthyism, when many trials had unfair verdicts without evidence or were not sentenced when there was evidence against them. To put everything into consideration, throughout history, fear has often been exploited by those in power to manipulate and control masses. This has resulted in the exploitation of rights and freedoms, leading to biased verdicts in court cases. From the McCarthyism era to recent cases such as the murder of Breonna Taylor, fear and other factors such as media, status, race, and money have often influenced the verdict of the court cases. It is crucial for Americans to stay vigilant and fight against these biases to ensure that the justice system remains fair and just for all.